Mayor, it's time. Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special council meeting. It's February 23rd, 2023, and the time is 6:30. We'll proceed with our roll call. Council, when I call your name, please say here or present. Mayor Maxton.
Here.
Councilmember Stroop.
Here.
Elizondo.
Here.
Bliss is not present. Kerner.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
And Menchow.
Present.
With 6 members of council present, a quorum is declared.
Thank you, Christina. Would everybody please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you. And welcome to everybody for attending our city council meeting tonight. Our meeting is being live broadcasted. If you do get an opportunity to speak as part of our meeting, I would ask that you use the microphone that's up here. If you speak from your seats, the individuals that are watching by live broadcast can't hear what you're saying. And for those that do get an opportunity to speak from the microphone, I'd ask that you state your name. If you're from some agency as to speak as part of the council meeting, please state what agency you're from. Or if you're here as a resident, please state if you're a Fair Oaks Ranch resident or not. Easy? All right. And we'll move on to citizens to be heard. We did have one individual that signed up, Jesse Haas, that would like to speak.
Are we ready?
Go ahead, yes.
Hi, my name is Jesse Haas, and I just wanted to get up here and point out that the first 3 bids on that sheet don't include disposal. And I'm actually a subcontractor to, yes, sir.
Okay.
Go
Could you
ahead.
tell me who you're with?
Haas Land Services. I'm a
Okay.
subcontractor to one of the bidders,
Okay.
and we have a TCEQ certified site about 8 miles down the road. And so it's a final resting place. I just want y'all to take into account that without the disposal, that right now the trucking runs about $300 a semi-load to truck mulch. And most of the mulch sites are charging $3 to $4 per cubic yard to accept it. So there's a huge fee that goes along with getting rid of it.
Okay.
So I just want you to take that into account.
I guess your message is that the bid we have doesn't include the disposal and trucking.
Some of the bids, yes, sir. Some of the bids don't include any of the disposal and trucking. And 10,000 cubic yards is a monster pile of mulch. If you're estimating 30,000 cubic yards of brush, then that normally grinds down 3 to 1.
Okay.
So just to keep in consideration.
All right.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being here tonight. Jesse was the only individual that we had signed up as part of Citizens to be Heard. Is there anybody else that didn't get an opportunity to sign up that would like to speak as part of Citizens to be Heard? Okay, then we'll move on to the purpose of the specially called meeting tonight. And the first is the consideration and possible action on approving a resolution continuing the Mayor of Fair Oaks Ranch February 17th, 2023 local disaster declaration. And so did all of council get a copy of the resolution?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Last Friday, we did a declaration, and I signed it as the mayor. The mayor's only authorized to carry that forward for 7 days, and prior to the end of 7 days, we have to bring it back to council to ratify it if we want to continue the local disaster declaration. And so that is what the resolution is that's been presented to you. And are there any questions on it?
How long does this allow us to extend?
It's an indefinite period until rescinded.
Wonderful.
That-
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any questions from anybody here tonight on the resolution?
Okay.
And with that, could I get a motion to approve a resolution continuing the Mayor of Fair Oaks Ranch February 17th, 2023 local disaster declaration?
So moved.
From Roy,
I second.
Roy and Laura.
I third it.
Worth it.
And any other discussion from council? And with that, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is approved. We added a second item on here. At the time we put the agenda together, the second item that's down here, which is consideration and possible action regarding requirements or expenditures associated with the local disaster. And since we put the agenda together over the weekend, we didn't know where we would be at this time, so we included it to provide any updates to council. I would like to start off with introducing a couple individuals that are here tonight. First, Tony Gross, if you could raise your hand. And Tony is our Texas Division of Emergency Management District Coordinator within our region. And so he has been the individual that has been our go-to guy for questions that we have had related to the local disaster. And then also we have David Williams here tonight, who is our Texas Division of Emergency Management, and he's a Region 6 grant coordinator, a wealth of knowledge, and has also been able to help us out with a lot of the information that we've had as part of the local disaster that we were going through. And I tell you what, are you ready now? Yeah. David's got a couple comments that he would like to make to us. And
Well, first things first, the Texas Division of Emergency Management is always here as a support agency. All disasters are always run locally, so the person in charge of your disaster response is the elected officials and the mayor, and in the unincorporated areas, your county judge. The state and federal government are only here at your invite and here as a support mechanism. We wanted to make sure you're aware that the governor has made a declaration request to the president to get a federal declaration. It is up to the president and to FEMA based on their review of the disasters that we have to see if we get that declaration. I have been asked to hit about 4 different points on contracts for you. Anything that we say, first off, I'm not an attorney. You should always run everything by your city attorney. We are here as your liaison with FEMA. We are here to advocate for whatever decision you make. You know your community the best. We're not here to tell you how to do anything. We're just giving you advice based on our experience. Any decisions that you make, we will advocate for you to help the safety of your community. But the first thing is, during emergency procurements, debris cleanup is considered an emergent situation. Debris can cause a lot of safety hazards if it's in the right of way, and so it is historically been reimbursed when there are federal declarations, and so you're encouraged to go ahead and get your community as safe as possible. But you still need to try to make sure you're always doing everything reasonably, meaning you, as I've seen on your agenda tonight, you have multiple quotes. That's always advisable. But once you're done with the emergent situation, as soon as it is safe for the city to do so, meaning as soon as you have the capacity or the bandwidth for your city staff to start a federal procurement process is advisable. Contact your city attorneys to go over all those federal procurement processes to get a federally procured contract, so that as soon as you have that in place, you transition to that contract to make sure you're as eligible as possible if we do get a federal declaration. And one thing with debris, there is a lot of documentation requirements if you want to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. Documentation is what we call cradle to grave of the debris, meaning where did it start and where did it end. And so every single truck load needs to be tracked, and you have to have an independent verification of every truckload. So that means if you're hiring a company to do it, a staff member is an independent person. There are also companies that do monitoring. You do whatever is best for you. And this is only if you would like to seek FEMA reimbursement. If you guys are doing it on your own dime, none of this applies. But the documentation is quite rigorous. I've gone over some meetings with your city manager and your mayor and gone into more detail on all of that, but I'm also here to answer any specific questions you might have. And the last thing to go over is your city's in a unique situation where you are in 3 counties. Every disaster is tracked at the state and county level. And if the state gets a declaration, not every county gets a declaration. You have to hit a state threshold, and then each individual county has to meet its threshold to be eligible. As such, being in 3 separate counties, you might hit a situation where one county gets a declaration and one county doesn't. And so then only the county that gets the declaration will be eligible for reimbursement. And so you need to be very diligent in the documentation of where the debris started. It doesn't matter where it ended up, but where it started is the debris that would be eligible. So if that county might do that. And so that's a unique situation faced by your city. But if there's any questions on any of that, we're here to try to do our best to answer that, and we're here to continue to support your mayor and staff as they go through this. So,
Question?
Yeah, so I know currently the governor has declared for Kendall County, which is one of the 3, but not for Bear or for Comel.
so that's based off of the requests that come from those areas. And if we get a federal declaration and we're still doing damage assessments, and if they get to the thresholds where they feel they meet those thresholds, then they can be added in. It's all dependent on the documentation that's received.
Okay. And so say we don't go to, say the federal government doesn't decide to make a declaration, what resources can we still get from the state without that federal declaration?
We are a liaison with FEMA generally, and so we respond during the disaster. So anytime you have an emergent situation for life and safety, if you don't have the means to do that, you can always submit a STAR request to the state, to our Emergency Operations Center, and we do whatever we can to meet that. Beyond that, if we don't get the federal declaration, there's not a pot of money set aside outside of that.
Okay, so the federal declaration is the key thing here.
Yes,
And
and we have
then-
requested that.
So for us, we're tracking the federal declaration and then also potentially the other 2 counties, because as of right now, it would only be Kendall side. Is that correct?
That's the only county I've seen that's submitted documentation that meets the threshold.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, meets the threshold at the,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. He was just letting me know Bear County's threshold is over 12 million, and that's in uninsured damages and to public property. So power lines, stuff like that. Sorry.
are those thresholds at the federal level or the state level? I'm still trying to, I understand where the money's coming from
Right.
at this point, but I'm trying to understand, the hierarchy of how
Yeah.
the thresholds are met. Is there a state threshold that then applies to the federal, or do we just basically need to target meeting the federal guidelines?
We're using the FEMA federal guidelines. It's a straight formula. And I might be wrong on this, but I believe it's $1.77 a person on a state level of uninsured damages, and on a county level, $4.77. But please, if I made a mistake on that, it's all very quickly available online. I try to do my best to memorize all the numbers, but I always advocate for people to double check me for your own citizens. But so it's a straight formula, whatever that number is. For the state, $1.77 comes out to about $51.5 million. We say $52 million of uninsured damages. This is all publicly available information. In every county, it's $4.77 per person based off of the population of the last census. And so that's where he was saying, like, Bear County has a $12 million threshold of uninsured damages to public right-of-way. So utilities help you get there. So that's how counties like Travis County are getting there. But it's about documentation and showing those types of damages.
My question, I think, is more for our staff. So all of these, whoever put these together, so on all of these bids, can we assume that whoever gave us these bids is able to conform with the requirements that he was mentioning of tracking to and from where it needs to go?
And we were going to have Clayton come up
Sorry.
after.
I didn't know that.
If we could, do you mind if we hold off till?
And if anything else comes up, I'm staying through the end of the meeting or afterwards if there's any specific one-on-one questions you'd like to have. So anything else, or would you like me to let him? Okay. Thank you for having
you.
us here.
Thank you. One of
And
the
like I said-
things that we have been working through this week is, he mentioned a bunch of requirements. So one, tracking by county, tracking by loads, and how we document that process as we're going through this. And so working through, Clayton and and Tobin and the rest of the city staff, developing that process of how we would do this when the time comes to start removing the brush. And so that we already have a plan in place once we decide on a contractor of how we're going to do this. But they've been very helpful. You and Tony both have significantly assisted us with all of our questions, and appreciate all your help.
And it will continue to be here as long as you guys need us. So thank you, and I'll let.
I don't know, did anybody else here have any questions for David before? Yes, ma'am.
What is the website that all of the information can be found?
So tdm.texas.gov should have a lot of that information. For the thresholds, I do believe we have them on there. Obviously, they're FEMA thresholds, so they would also be on the FEMA website. I'm almost positive. Tony, we have those on our website, the county by county breakdown?
Well, I know it is in the Texas Executive Guide.
The Texas Executive Guide, okay. Then they did just get updated, so with the last census, it actually used to be 38 million, and it got, because of our population growth, it went up a little bit to 52.
So, sorry, more questions about the threshold.
Oh,
The
sure.
the federal, you said, is $4.77 of uninsured loss
On
per
public property.
on public property?
Right, so we're talking about public assistance. There's a difference between public assistance and individual assistance. And so the public assistance has a threshold, individual assistance does not. Individual assistance is an assessment that FEMA keeps
So to
internal.
qualify under the federal guidelines, we have, it still goes against our population, which is approximately 10,000 people. So that works out to, we'd have to have $477,000 of uninsured loss to qualify for the federal.
But it doesn't go by the city, it goes by the county. There, it doesn't go
So-
smaller than it
So
doesn't.
for each portion that's in a county, like just for, I may be boring some people, but Comal is a very small
Right.
and low populated, but if it's on the public right of way, we would have to have $477,000 worth of loss in Comal County to qualify for any reimbursement for Comal.
You would have to go off of the population of Comal
Oh, the
County
Comal alone. Okay.
times $4.77
Okay, got
of
it.
the last
Okay,
census.
thank you.
And
That
that should
helps.
be, that's what you can find online quite easily. And I can pull that up and I can have it for you by the end of the meeting if you'd like, for the 3 different counties, the exact thresholds. I do have that.
I think the key that he was laying out is that to have an emergency declaration in the county, it has to meet these levels.
For FEMA, federal public assistance, to be eligible in that county.
And so that's how they determine what that amount is by the 477 times the population in that county.
But we have to demonstrate that we've had a loss to that extent in that area, correct?
No,
Yes, an
it's for
uninsured
the
loss.
entire county, does not specifically relate to us. And so what we need is the emergency declaration in that county
Oh, got it.
to qualify us for FEMA funding in that county.
Yeah, so all of the county damage counts towards that county.
And then the reimbursement is based on us getting a fair market value contract, and then we get reimbursed for the cost?
So a general declaration under the Stafford Act is 75%, 25%, so 75% federal, 25% local. The president has the authorization to change that all the way up to 90% federal, 10% local. So that's up to the federal government to make that declaration. So if we get the declaration, you're going to have 75% of eligible costs that are properly documented that can be eligible for reimbursement. And in the end, the person that makes that decision is FEMA. We're here to liaison and work with you and get that documentation and work with them. But in the end, that is a decision they get to make.
So currently, we're only eligible because only Kendall has made the disaster declaration. So it sounds like we're only eligible for the 75-25% in Kendall?
Well, right now, we haven't got the federal declaration at all. The governor has requested the president to make a federal declaration. So,
But if that comes through, the only county that is Kendall that has made the disaster declaration. So at that point, if it comes through, we're only 75-25% in Kendall, but Comal and Bear have not yet met the threshold and/or have not filed a disaster declaration?
Last I saw, I've not seen that they've filed that. If they have those damages, they just need to be documented and reported.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we track essentially the waste, or whatever you want to call it, the branches, use your words, that come from Kendall, and then we're eligible, if it all goes through, at least right now, for reimbursement, 75% of the Kendall portion of this bill, essentially.
Essentially, that
Okay.
sounds accurate.
Perfect, thank you.
Do you recommend that a city or a county go through and get bids and go through and do the disposal before we hear about all this? Or do we have to wait and hear about the federal declaration and do something else first?
So that's a decision that you guys have to make locally of how you want to respond to your disaster. We're here to try to support however we can. And so we always say nothing should come in the way of life and safety of your community. And so if you view that as a life and safety risk, that's a decision you make, and we're here to support that. And if it becomes eligible, we're here to advocate for reimbursement.
But you recommend that, knowing that we may potentially want to file for reimbursement, we should do all the documentation and follow all the federal or whatever procurement
Right.
upfront now with
Right.
anticipation in the
As long
future.
as you know that even doing all that's never a guarantee. There is
Right.
no such thing as a guarantee with reimbursement from the federal government. But the only guarantee is if you don't document, you're not going to be eligible.
Right, right.
Got it.
But you could document, do everything correct, and still not get reimbursement.
And plus, it's reimbursement, so there's just nothing stopping us from picking a vendor
Right.
and getting it started now, as long as we do all the documentation. Because, I mean, I don't want to sit here and wait another 3 weeks,
Right.
you know, with debris on the side for Bear and Comel and all this stuff. I just want to get it gone.
Right.
Right?
And that's why it's with the decisions you make that we support. And we know that disasters, you know your community the best. You know what your community needs.
Okay, thank you, appreciate
All
that.
right. And did you have any other?
Just do you have a business card?
I do. I will grab one and hand it out.
Hey, David, just so I can qualify some of the information, so for the emergency, for the president to make the declaration for the state of Texas, you had to have certain qualifiers, and that was really to meet a uninsured value of damages over
51.5 million. We say 52 million to be safe.
And that is comprised of all the counties that have now submitted information up, and they have qualifiers also that they have to meet.
Right.
And once that declaration is made nationally, it would include the state of Texas and then only the counties that qualified.
Right. So you have to meet a state threshold, and then your county has to meet the threshold. You're just in the unique position that you have 3 separate counties.
And so in our case right now, just as Chesley mentioned, Kendall County is the only county that has met that qualifier within their county.
And so-
Right. So it's not been validated by FEMA, but they have submitted documentation of damages that exceed their threshold.
Okay.
So if we get a federal declaration, it is likely that they would be approved as well.
Okay.
Because FEMA does come in and validate all of the damages.
How long do the counties have?
So generally, it's 30 days from the disaster to get documentation done. And
I know where we're at.
we're, I would
21.
say we're about a week or 2 out from that.
From that. So essentially, Bear and Comel have a week or 2 to file, if you will.
If they want.
The
Well,
If they
statute,
decide, okay.
the statute does allow for 1 extension. And so if they're still gathering information, I've never seen FEMA deny an extension, but that doesn't mean there's always a first time for everything.
And so the follow-on comment I had to that is that what Laura brought up is talking about it documenting it, and we know that we'll need to document it in Kindle, but I think we should continue those procedures in Bear and Comel because we don't know what's going to happen on down the road. And if we didn't do the proper documentation for Bear, what you said is we wouldn't be eligible, for
Right.
any FEMA reimbursement if we didn't document properly.
It's a good practice if, but in the end, it's your decision. There are cities that don't want to deal with that and they have the resources to do it themselves, and that's 100% fine. We do still ask every city to submit their damages so that you can help the state meet those thresholds so that we can give an accurate picture. But if you want to help out in your own way, we don't want to ever get involved in telling you how to spend your money.
My plan would be that we just continue on like all 3 counties were named and document in accordance with that. And then if Bear and Comel don't end up being qualified, then that's right.
Something.
Right.
Yeah.
Roy?
I'll hold my question until Clayton comes up.
Okay. Anything else? Sorry, David, we didn't mean to
Oh,
grill
no.
you.
that-
Good questions and
Yeah.
great answers, so thank you very
We're
much.
glad to be here and to support, and then we want to make sure people know that we exist and have some options.
Actually, I'm sorry, one more. So the city declaration that we did, the city disaster, is that how we got you to come and help us?
Well, no, you just
Okay.
get us anytime, and so anytime you want. And I would love to come back on what we call a Blue Sky Day and work with your staff and talk about some of the different programs that we offer. That's one of my jobs, is to come and help cities be prepared before the disasters and have policies in place or these contracts so that you're not having to do it afterwards. And I would love to come back at any time to work with you all or your staff or the public or anybody that would like to learn more of what we can do. I have a 3-hour presentation on on all the different programs that TDM has and ways we can help be prepared up front.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, you
Oh, did you want to talk about any of the procedures or anything we've been through the week, or we just turn it over to Clayton? Clayton's done a lot of work on collecting the bids, and we were giving special considerations for qualifying for federal level procurement that Clayton had to go through, so he had to research that, make sure we had it all together, and then he's now gone on for some bids, so.
Yes, so, and also I do want to thank David because he has been a very good resource throughout this last week. I guess to start a couple of questions, and then I'll give some backdrop. We did inform the vendors that tracking would be important, so we did have that conversation with them of the importance of tracking per county, so they know that that is a requirement. Another item that we discussed was maybe some potential federal, long-term federal contracting requirements. When I reached out to the bidders, I did let them know that we might ask them to include that in a contract. It's through the, it's 2 CFR 200 is the particular government code that lays out those. And I did let them know that we would be seeking reimbursement, and we might ask them to include that. Right now, we're operating under emergency procurement, so essentially what we're doing is trying to act quickly and efficiently and do as much outreach as possible. David had talked about if it becomes a long-term type of issue, then it could slide into those federal requirements. And I have researched those. I have those, where I feel we could get the contractors to sign off on those easily and make sure we comply with everything that's needed. So we did reach out. I did provide you all a list of the bids. They do vary, as you see. And talking through the different bidders that we received, and there's different ways to go about doing this, essentially, is why they come up with different numbers. It can depend on how far they're having to haul to, if they're hauling bulk debris and taking it straight to a landfill, if they're chipping it, then hauling it. There's different ways to go about doing that, because there's a cost to essentially grind it, but then you're reducing your capacity to the landfill. There's also a bid that we received for just chipping it on site in front of the houses and into a truck and hauling it straight to a TCEQ certified landfill. So there's different ways to go about doing that. But as you can see, we got the bids from 6 different vendors, and thank you, Christina, for sharing that. And you see some additional ones that we reached out to. But yes.
Sorry. So when we had Republic here and their bid recently, I guess it was last meeting, they said that it was a sliding scale, essentially how much came in and out. So could all of these numbers change? Are they all sliding scales? Or, I mean, I understand that this 936 could go up or down depending on the capacity, I guess, it takes. So are all of them that way? Yeah, I guess it's hard for me to compare them in that sense.
Yes, so we have our estimates based on what we've done and what Republic took into account. Those estimates are what were given to the other bidders. So I shared the information that we had, the map depiction that we had at the last council meeting, as well as the quantities that were shown with them to kind of make sure that they had an accurate depiction. In addition to that, also shared with them the idea of chipping it, storing it somewhere else, and doing it that way. To answer your question, sorry, I took the long way around to answer your question. We have our estimated amounts of 35,000, whether it's broken up in cubic yards or on a daily rate. We don't truly know that until the work gets done. The bidders are not going to know until they actually do the work.
So these are not, I guess, so the bids are not set in stone, essentially. So we won't say that Earthco or Republic or whatever are going to be, our max bid is 936, because if it's a lot more, so more people put a whole lot out as they're, coming out to pick things up, that bid could go up, or if people have, their lawn services haul it off, it could go down. So we can't really say, at least what I'm understanding, is that this is a number set in stone. Is that correct?
Correct. We could have a not to exceed amount, but this would have to be tracked. It would all be, that's why another part of the reason why the tracking is so important on a daily basis to see how we're progressing based on what we estimated. Just with this massive amount of brush that we have, we just can't, there's just too much risk for somebody to say that they can absolutely do it for that amount.
So do we know why there's such a discrepancy in these bids? I mean, 2.4 million to, looks like 112,000? I mean.
Correct. So in talking with the different vendors, I think part of it is how far they're away. So some of them will have to travel and come and factor all of that into account, the lodging, the staging, the mobilization of all of their equipment. Some of the lower amounts, and for instance, the top row that you see, that's for a different method than the other bids we received. So that shows, so coming up with that number eliminates picking it up and hauling it as bulk brush, or picking it up, taking it somewhere, grinding it, and hauling it again, right? So you have essentially double the hauling cost. That method is just for chipping it into a truck that they own, taking it to a TCEQ landfill. It also, in talking with multiple vendors, it varies with where they can get in it to a landfill. Travel time is associated with that, especially in the area we're at. If they're taking it into a more populated area, they're going to be spending time, travel time, things like that. So those are some of the reasons why we got that. We had some break it up by, hiring a third party to grind it for them. Some just picking it up, taking it directly. So there's just different ways for them to go about doing it. But I will say that, we did vet these bids, and I know there are some that are lower, but I had multiple conversations with these. References were provided, as well as researching how they work, and multiple conversations with them. But all as a starting point used the same information that we have with Republic, and then additionally we're given some different options.
Are there, with Republic, we have size requirements for the piles in front of the houses? Is that the same for all of the vendors?
No, none of the vendors, these additional vendors gave size requirements. So whether they would be putting it into a chipper or having one of their grapples, they didn't give us those size requirements on there. It's essentially just packing as much as they can into a truck is really what's important for them to minimize the cost.
Follow up on that
Sure.
question, Clayton, because I kind of understood that the general design of this work would be that we wouldn't use the same parameters that we use for our normal bulk pickup in terms of the size of the piles, number one, and that number two, it wouldn't even require that you have a contract with Republic as part of this. All you have to do is there has to be material out in the right of way, so to speak, which is maybe another question I have about the FEMA validation that I'll go ahead and mention now, because what I heard is that the federal reimbursement's available if the debris is in the public right of way. And my question is, what happens when it was located on private property and then moved to the public right of way? How does that affect FEMA's evaluation?
I'm probably,
Sorry, but I brought my laptop up because I found the actual numbers for your counties. For that, I would just say you have the responsibility of keeping your right-of-ways clean. And if there was something that, do you always track how it got there? I will say this, you are not allowed to, it is not eligible for reimbursement if you go on to private property, but it is eligible for reimbursement if it's in the right of way.
Thank you.
And do you want to know the exact thresholds for your counties while I'm up here, since our,
Sure, go ahead.
okay. So Bear County is actually at $8,921,398.56.
9 million.
Yeah, so essentially 9 million. Your other county is Comal County, right? $717,064.44. And Kendall, and remember this is uninsured public damage. Kendall is $196,598.76. And the state threshold is exactly $51,587,544. So that's why I round up to 52.
I have another question. I don't know who it should be directed at. So, sorry, hi. What about our citizens that live within a gated community? So I'm assuming gated communities don't have or have small amounts of public right-of-way. So what would we ask them to do? Where should they put this? Are we going to have a big pile in front, or are they just absolutely excluded from brush pickup?
So we had this discussion today, and there is some areas that we need to figure out, because it has to do with the safety of roadways, and in some essence that we're responsible for. And so in that, we do have law enforcement agreements with some of the gated communities, and do they qualify? And so we don't have that answer yet. I think the bottom line is that as we're looking at this contract does include all of the gated communities, and to ensure that we pick up the brush within those areas. What you're talking about is really the FEMA reimbursement. We would qualify that we go towards picking up that.
So regardless of whether it qualifies for FEMA reimbursement, it is part of our plan to pick up all of the debris, whether it's in a private community or not.
And are we asking them to put it out front, or are we asking them to find a public right-of-way to put it in case we are able to get a disaster declaration for the other two counties?
Yeah, so right now the plan is just to leave it in the gated communities on the public right-of-way.
Thank you.
Or on the right-of-way.
We're not going to ask them to move it, though, once they put it there?
No.
Okay.
That is not the plan as of now. Did we interrupt you enough?
no,
Yeah.
I'm happy to
Good
answer
questions,
any
a lot
questions
of-
that you
yes.
have. Sure, whoever. This is everybody that has submitted a bid as of today. So we've been working as quickly as possible to try to get as many bids as possible. So started that process of reaching out on Friday, and so far it's what we've got.
So what are you looking for tonight from us?
I don't know if, Tobin, if you'd like to answer that?
Yeah. So I'm going to back up a little bit just to provide a little more background. So since the event, we've been meeting at the staff level, and the mayor has been there every morning, and we're going through all this information as we learned through Tony and David and their team, as well as our own internal information. We're currently triaging and establishing all the protocols and procedures to track this information. Based off what we're hearing, we're grossly ahead of a lot of our other cities, because one of the things that we did was created this GIS map that council has seen, and we've already started to geocode that with pictures, which is critical for this whole documentation by county, and we're also breaking that down by neighborhood so that whether this gated community question comes into play or not, we'll at least have the data broken out that way. Tonight, if the council's ready to select one of these bidders with whatever means and methods they have up there, we don't have the final price, right? So I would strongly recommend that you put a not to exceed amount in there, because once we pick one of these vendors, the next thing that we have to do is negotiate the contract, inclusive of how we're going to, develop the final number. Is it going to be based off volume? Is it going to be based off number of truck trips and all that? It's also critical at some point. You have another meeting next week, so you're talking about delaying a week if you're not ready tonight. But one of the critical elements is for us to eventually pick someone, know that the rate may change, but so that we can get them scheduled and mobilized to start. Another week may mean one of these vendors is pushed out another week or two, depending on what jobs they have lined up as well. So we're still triaging that as well. But best case scenario, if y'all want to pick one of these vendors and tell us, give the city manager authorization to go negotiate up to a not to exceed amount, and then we can start. If you're not ready, we'll continue to pull in bids and vet everything and bring it back next Thursday.
Yeah, my personal sense is, there's an awful lot of disparity, not only in the price, but in the specification of the work. So it's really difficult to kind of visualize an apples to apples comparison of these bids. I guess I would like to see some of that, maybe a little bit more standardization, but in addition to that, I think we do need to move timely, because I think some of these people could become unavailable because everybody else is trying to get this done too. So I know I'm saying take more time, do more analysis, but don't use a whole lot of time, so that we can do what I guess Tobin is suggesting, that we need to get moving on this before this problem. One of the things I'm concerned about, the other day we had red flag warnings out. We've got all this brush sitting around, so it is a critical issue.
I have two questions. One, our normal process isn't to have the city council pick between bidders. So why are we following a different process?
Just with the different unique circumstances of doing an emergency procurement like this and having bids, having some different ways to go about doing this. Just the unique nature of this, we wanted to bring it to you. Typically, on a standard construction contract, we're following a much longer, more formal process. We've got specifications that have been developed over time. You've got to you've got to advertise those for a minimum of 2 weeks. It's just a little bit different. So we wanted to be transparent with you to show where we're at, why the numbers are a little bit different, and just answer any questions that you might have.
What's staff's recommendation?
Hey, Clayton.
I would
I mean, I have one, but I want to see what your answer is.
I would concur with what Tobin had mentioned earlier about authorizing a not to exceed negotiation and execution of a not to exceed contract. We could include a termination clause in that contract. We typically do, but we would just put it in there where we could terminate immediately or ask to ramp up if we're happy and we see that we want additional resources so it can get done quicker. We could do that, but personally, that would be what my recommendation is.
Of the bidders, which is a staff's recommendation? Because you guys review bidders all the time.
So we had 3 bids in the all in the same range, I would say. So that range fluctuates a little bit, but I think we have kind of a breaking point from the Rico's Tree Service, KC Trees, and the Baldwin's Tree Service. All of those we've discussed in great detail with. They've provided references. We've done research. We know of other cities that have used them, other clients that have used them. I feel comfortable with any of those. What I would recommend is that we go with the least, or the most cost efficient, the least expensive option. It carries the least amount of risk, in my opinion. I did ask for verification that everything was included that they mentioned. So I think what they're proposing makes a lot of sense. From a staging perspective, there's some additional cost and monitoring that won't necessarily need to be included. If you are going to be staging something, you've got some TCEQ items that you'll need to take care of. It's minimal compared to the cost, but you'll need to rent a fence to compare that. So that could cost a few $1,000s. In the grand scheme of things, not much to this, but there's some additional risks and monitoring that come along with that are associated with each additional step you require.
Yeah, so sounds like you don't have a preference between the first three. Just say whichever one we want. So for the first one, chipping and hauling on site, what type of risk is there? Having a truck on the side of the street, chipping trees as cars are driving by? What type of things do we need to consider in that?
So, great question, and those are things we're talking about. Traffic control, also who's going to audit the trucks as they're being loaded and before they leave. So yes, you're actively working in the right-of-way, so it's controlling that scene. Those are risks. What I was going to say on top of Clayton is, one of these companies that can provide a turnkey, to me, it seems like it would be easier to have a chipper going along the right-of-way versus having to haul it from the street to a staging site. We are simultaneously moving forward with establishing the TCEQ site, the spoil site under emergency permitting. We're prepared to do that. I believe there's going to be some extra cost with that because we are going to have to secure it. We are going to have to separate the piles by county, fence them off. There's a whole bunch of other things that we just have to do just to continue to be eligible to ask for the reimbursement. If we're going along the street and they're just chipping it along the way, we're still going to have to document that by county, by volume, and all of those good things, but we'll just be doing it lot by lot. To me, that seems like it would be easier, but I don't have all those answers yet because we're still vetting all of that.
Just to wrap up my questions here, would we be taking this money out of the unallocated general fund until we find out about the reimbursement?
Yeah. Well, Scott is prepared to show the slide he showed last time. That was one of the.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here. I apologize.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
That was one of. Well, he's prepared to bring that back up tonight. That was one of the takeaways that I discussed with the mayor earlier. That if council is ready to move forward tonight, we would like you to identify what pot of money. Essentially, it's all the same, but we do have the surplus versus the general fund reserves.
Okay, thank you very much. I think
Yes,
I've
ma'am.
exhausted my questions, so.
Kinsley.
So if there's more questions, that's fine, but I was going to actually make a motion.
We have a comment from the audience.
We have,
Sir, would you mind
you
using the mic?
My question is on the first two bids, it's their daily rates for chip trucks. Have you taken into account that every time that chip truck's full, it leaves, and it's going to take several hours for it to go dump to get back before they can produce again? You know what I'm saying? An average chip truck's about 30 cubic yards, so they'll fill that up in an hour, but depending on where they're going in town to dump that, it could be a 3 or 4 hour turn. So that needs to be taken into consideration also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Just to, I have an additional comment on that, just to kind of add to that. I did have conversations about how far they were going for the landfills and things of that nature. So I do feel that they could accomplish that in a relatively quick manner. Understanding that it's the logistics of regardless of which disposal site they go to and which company, there are, it's a big task that they're doing, but those questions were asked. and I was reassured of that.
I feel like having the answers will help us answer the question. I mean, sounds like you have information behind the scenes that might be beneficial for us to be able to make this decision that are not available to us right now.
Agree. Clayton,
Okay.
did any of these companies, do you have any information, I'll ask it this way, of perfect world, we were to execute a contract tomorrow subsequent to council's authorization, what's the earliest someone can mobilize? Are we talking about mobilizing before next Thursday, which is their next meeting, or would it be subsequent to that?
So the vendors, the top 3 vendors that you see, they could all start next week based on discussions with them.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a motion to authorize the city manager to spend up to $300,000 on the removal of this to, the money coming from the unallocated general fund and their choice of who they choose, being that they're the ones that go through these contracts.
For the city manager to sign a contract not to exceed $300,000.
Correct. And he can choose any of the bids up to $300,000.
Okay?
I don't want to pick a vendor.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion from Chesley. The second from Emily. Any discussion from
Yes,
council?
I have a, so do we need to make any allowances for associated cost? I guess there was some things mentioned about needing to prepare a yard, potentially those kind of things, fence rentals, whatnot. Do we need to specifically authorize the use of any funds for that, or is that something that staff would just handle behind the scenes?
It all comes from the authorization that you're putting forward tonight. It's the same pot. So it would come out of that 300,000.
So the 300,000 would not just be for the tree contractor, it would be also for the incidentals.
Yes.
And do y'all consider that sufficient to get a good start on this? And then we can see if that's not enough, that we could authorize additional if it, there was
The
that
answer to
overrun.
that's yes, I absolutely believe that's.
Okay.
that's-
I would expect that if they needed more funds than that, they would bring that forward to us, and at that point, we would be able to authorize more. But at least this gets us started in moving forward in the direction of choosing someone, getting this taken care of. It sounds like all of these vendors are able to track it like we need to do. So at least it gets us moving forward in the correct direction.
I guess my comment is that I'd like to see this project get started. I think this is a good way to go ahead and do that. Sorry, mic's off. This is a good way to get the project moving, so I don't get yelled at again by Casey. Good way to get the project going. I do like the concept of chipping on site because it makes a whole lot more sense to me to go ahead and get it into the truck, drop it once, and not have to move it twice. That's going to save us money and man hours in the long run, going it and doing it that way. Yeoman's job, great, Clayton.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, and the motion is that they do not need to come back to us. We're going to say, go ahead and sign a contract, $300,000. It's not coming back to us at all as long as it's within that amount. And is that the, I'm good with that. I just want to make sure.
If it's
Yes.
within that amount, I would expect they weren't coming back to us. They can choose a vendor.
Sign
staff-
one tomorrow,
yep,
potentially.
Sign one tomorrow, but if it's going to exceed that amount, they would need to come back to us to get release of more funds.
To start as soon as possible.
Correct.
Okay.
That's my motion.
My belief, based on the information you've provided, Clayton, is that most of the three, the top three, they would all be below 300,000.
Correct.
The challenge would be is if, after they got into it, then we realize, hey, we're going to exceed 300,000 because it's more than we thought. And at that point, yes, the requirement is that they have to come back to council for continuance.
But the initial contract will be less than 3, so.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
And if it works for council, we're just going to leave this as a standing item on every one of your agendas while we're working through this process in case you need an update or need to make another decision.
And we can get updates on where they stand. Okay. We have a motion and a second on the table. Any other discussion related to it? All in favor of approval of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you, Clayton.
Thanks.
Now, as a part of that motion, you did clarify that the funding would come from the unallocated balance that we currently have within the budget. I'd asked Scott to come up and present some information, but what he's going to present, we've already made a decision on, so I don't know that there's any further need to discuss it.
This is a special, sit down.
We did use the correct fund name, Scott. There's clarity on exactly which fund we were talking about, which was that
I heard
unallocated
the
surplus.
unallocated.
That came from the surplus.
Unallocated reserve, yes.
Correct.
Would you mind using the mic, sir?
Rich Nichols, 8115 Windmill Circle. My question is, have y'all decided that you're going to need the federal and state assistance to get through this, or can we do it on our own nickel?
So, good question. And I believe the process is the city would go ahead and pay for the cleanup, whether we did it with federal assistance or not. Once completed, we're in the process now, but it would be a reimbursement process to the funds that we expended for this.
That's what I'm gathering at the moment. I just have one comment, and it's a personal comment of my own. I don't know if it's for anybody else in the city, but I would prefer that we stay out of, that we don't, not knocking anybody, not going into bed with the federal government or the state government. We're a home rule city. The reason we're a home rule city is because the residents decided that they would like to form their own path without the assistance of the state. And when you get reimbursement from the state, for whatever reasons, I just feel like there may be a
I know what you're saying. Quid
what
pro
she
quo.
said, yes, down the road somewhere that I would prefer not to put the city in that position. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. That was all anybody else have any other comments? Anything else from council? Anything else we needed tonight?
Thank you very much for coming in on a special meeting.
Christine, anything we missed?
Yes, sir.
All right, I now have the time is 7:28 and we are adjourned. 2 minutes.